The stench of blood and decaying flesh was the air I breathed. It clung to my nostrils, seeped into my clothes, and lingered under my nails no matter how hard I scrubbed. The field hospital wasn't a place of healing anymore. It was a charnel house dressed in canvas and desperation. The wounded came in faster than we could process them, and the dead left slower than they should have. Every surface was stained. Every breath I took felt like inhaling rot. Every scream reminded me that I was losing something more vital than territory. My grip on humanity was fraying. I staggered between gurneys, fingers shaking, vision blurred from the grind of exhaustion and trauma. My hands knew what to do: clamp, suture, inject. But my mind lagged behind, hollowed out by the endless cycle of treating what couldn't be saved. We weren't winning this war. Not really. Every victory was another page in a ledger of mutilation and loss. I used to believe we were defending something pure, freedom, survival. But the longer I spent in the thick of it, the more that conviction felt like a lie I told myself, so I wouldn't drown. The shriek of incoming drop pods sliced through the air, sharp and immediate. Everyone flinched, muscle memory from months of this same routine. I ducked instinctively, bracing for the tremors and the fresh wave of broken bodies that always followed. They were back. The Theans, bug-eyed monstrosities in segmented armor, all efficiency and brutality. They hit hard, fast, and without emotion, leaving nothing behind but scorched earth and severed limbs. I was elbow-deep in a soldier's thigh, trying to stop the arterial bleed when the tent flap rustled violently. My first thought was that another casualty had stumbled in. I didn't look up until the person, or thing, collapsed near my feet with a wet, metallic thud. I froze. It wasn't one of ours. The creature's armor shimmered, not the dull, olive-brown carapace we knew too well, but an iridescent blue that caught the low lights and fractured them like glass. For a heartbeat, I didn't move. No one did. Then I realized it was injured, badly. A glowing trail of fluid, its blood, I guessed, spilled from a gash in its side. No weapon in its hands, no sign of aggression. Just a trembling, wounded thing on the edge of death. My stomach twisted. A Thean, on our side of the line, alone, vulnerable. The roar of rage in my chest was immediate and overwhelming. This thing was part of the swarm that had killed my friends, turned humans into mulch beneath its claws. My first impulse was to finish the job its enemies had started. But my hands didn't listen. Even as my mind screamed for vengeance, they moved of their own accord, steady, practiced, automatic. Years of training took over. I knelt beside it. My fingers brushed the slick exoskeleton, found the damage. Its limbs twitched, its mandibles clicked in pain, and what I could only interpret as fear. No aggression, no attack, just blood and suffering. I felt the eyes on my back before I heard the voices. Soldiers, medics, commanders. Someone shouted my name, their voice tight with confusion. My earpiece crackled. Orders buzzed through the open channel. "Secure the target," someone said. "Put it down," someone else barked. But I stayed where I was, the whole war narrowing to this single moment. This wasn't a combatant anymore. This was a patient. "Hold it down," I snapped to the two assistants behind me. They hesitated. I didn't blame them. Their faces twisted in disbelief and barely disguised disgust. But they obeyed. Training overrode fear. That's how it worked. It's how we stayed alive. The creature thrashed weakly, its segmented limbs spasmed, struggling without strength. I pulled a standard sedative from my pouch. It was made for humans. No idea if it would work or kill it outright. But it was the best shot I had, better than the alternative, better than what the others would do if I waited. I injected it. It sagged, twitching once, then still. The tension in the tent was a physical thing, pressing in like thick smoke. No one said a word. No one fired a shot. I didn't wait for approval. I started the procedure. The armor was a nightmare, dense and organically fused, like bone over steel. But I'd opened up enough chests in my time to find the seams. I worked fast, afraid not of the enemy before me, but of the soldiers behind me. My hands shook, not from fear, but adrenaline. There were no guides, no diagrams, no textbooks for this anatomy, just guesswork and instinct. I cut through armor, peeled it back, exposed alien muscle, purple and rubbery, pulsing with veins that glowed like bioluminescent jellyfish. The wound was deep, jagged. Something had torn through the plating and shredded whatever passed for organs inside. I didn't know what was vital, what could be removed, what couldn't. I made decisions based on feel and faith. Sweat ran down my face, mixing with the Tian's blood. It stung my eyes. I blinked it away and kept working. Time folded in on itself. I lost track of minutes, maybe hours. And then it was done. I stitched what I could, sealed what I couldn't. Whether it would live or die, I couldn't say. But it wasn't bleeding anymore. With a nod to my assistants, still frozen in silent shock, I motioned for them to help me move it. We dragged the unconscious Tian to a corner, buried it beneath blood-soaked bandages and discarded gauze. My arms trembled. My legs buckled. I collapsed into the nearest chair, vision tunneling from the sheer drain. Just a few minutes of rest, I told myself. Just a few. I closed my eyes and waited for the fallout to begin. I awoke to a rough shake, heart hammering before my eyes even opened. Sergeant Miller stood over me, face like chiseled stone, mouth set in a hard line. "There's a commotion outside. Get your ass out there, medic." Panic surged in my chest. They'd found it. The Tian. The secret I'd hidden under bloody rags and silence. I rose on legs that barely obeyed, head spinning, blood pounding against my eardrums. If they'd found the alien, I wouldn't get a court-martial. I'd get a bullet to the back of the skull. Treason didn't last long on the front lines. I stumbled into the light, blinking against the glare, and stopped cold. Thians. A whole formation of them, tall and rigid in their segmented armor, stood inside our camp. Inside. Their presence sent our soldiers into a frenzy of controlled chaos. Weapons were up, safeties off, every muscle twitching toward violence. But the Thians made no move to attack. They stood in tight formation, guarding something at their center, mandibles clicking softly, unreadable expressions on their inhuman faces. My throat went dry. Commander Harris stepped forward, his voice booming across the clearing. "Explain yourselves, now!" One of the Tians stepped out, its movements fluid and deliberate. And then, from the center of their formation, came a smaller figure. My gut dropped. It was the one I had treated. Iridescent blue armor. Thin bandages still wrapped around its midsection. My bandages. It moved stiffly but with purpose, one arm raised in a gesture that could have meant surrender or challenge. It had survived, and now it had returned with an escort. A translator bot hovered into position, cobbled together from salvaged tech and hissing wires. The Tian spoke in its clicking dialect. A moment later, the bot buzzed in flat monotone. "We seek the return of our comrade. Offer of truce in exchange." The words hit like a gunshot. No one moved. The air was electric, every breath held, every trigger finger tense. The idea, an enemy asking for a truce because I'd saved one of theirs, was too alien to compute. Eyes turned to me. I stood frozen, 1,000 eyes dissecting my every breath. Harris didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was tight, controlled. "The medic treated one of yours," he said, almost like he didn't believe it himself. "Against orders. But it's alive. The translator relayed his words. The Theans reacted, not with the cold stoicism we expected, but with something else. Shock. Not the kind you see in the eyes, but in the ripple that passed through them like a silent wave. They began conferring in clicks and hisses, their leaders' mandibles moving rapidly, heads turning toward the wounded Thean. The one I'd saved looked directly at me, multifaceted eyes glinting in the sunlight. Its gaze held no hate, no triumph, just awareness, recognition. When their leader spoke again, the translator buzzed with halting words. Acknowledgement, unexpected. Gratitude, not anticipated. The camp held its breath. We offer temporary cessation of hostilities. Window to discuss possibilities. Even the translator hesitated on that last word, as if its programming didn't know what to do with it. Possibilities. My secret wasn't a secret anymore. The proof stood at the center of camp, alive and surrounded by its kind. There was no hiding what I'd done, what I was. I watched Commander Harris closely, waiting for the order that would end this all. But he hesitated, just for a second. Then his jaw tightened. 1 hour, he growled. Then you leave. No negotiation, no tricks. The Tians nodded, if that's what the subtle dip of their armored heads meant, and turned as one. They lifted their wounded comrade with a care that jarred me more than any of this. These were the monsters we'd been fighting, but they carried their injured like we carried ours. Not beasts, not machines, soldiers. The camp didn't relax, not really. Everyone was still on edge, watching me like I was a lit fuse. Back in the tent, no one spoke to me. I wasn't arrested, but I wasn't free either. I was confined, watched, a prisoner in all but name. My hands itched to work. My thoughts spun out. I replayed every moment of that surgery, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake or something else, something more dangerous. Was this mercy or madness? Hours crawled by. The heat pressed in like punishment. The silence was worse than judgment. Until finally, Commander Harris entered. His expression was unreadable. When he spoke, his tone lacked the bite I expected. "You sure got a pair on you, medic." I said nothing. "The Thean High Command wants to talk. With you, specifically." I stared at him. That didn't make sense. I was a field medic, an expendable cog in a bloody machine. Yet somehow I'd become the center of a diplomatic rupture no one saw coming. We left the camp on foot. Soldiers watched us go in silence, some with scorn, some with confusion, a few with something dangerously close to hope. The Thean encampment wasn't far. It had sprung up like fungus on a wound, organic structures that pulsed faintly, grown more than built. We met them halfway. A single Thean stepped forward, the one I'd treated. Alive, moving, still healing. It looked at me and bowed its head slightly. I didn't know what that meant, but I returned the gesture. Inside one of their structures, a circular chamber waited, filled with a dull bioluminescent glow. More Theans stood within, clearly high-ranking. And across the circle, the one I'd saved stood again. Beside her was their leader, the one who had made the offer. The translator hovered at the center. The lead Thean gestured toward me. Then the voice buzzed. "The one you call medic," requested. By name, I blinked. "What?" The leader stepped forward, gaze locked on mine. "It bears our mark," it said, in English. Rough, broken, but unmistakable. My eyes snapped to the commander I had saved. There, etched crudely on her shoulder, was a circle, a symbol I hadn't realized I'd drawn in her blood, a human medical emblem, the mark of the healer. "She saved the life of a key commander," the translator clarified. "We hold such marks in high esteem." The shock hit harder than any battlefield wound. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a commander, a symbol, just like me, a catalyst. I'm a medic, I said, throat dry. It's my duty to treat the injured, regardless of who they are. The leader watched me, its voice rasped. This is war. You would save your enemy, risking all. For what? I met its eyes, or tried to. For the chance, I said, that maybe, just maybe, we don't have to be enemies. The silence after was longer than any I'd known. The translator buzzed, then sputtered. Even the machine hesitated, as if it couldn't process what I'd said. Finally, the commander I saved stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, measured. The healer risked much. We acknowledge this. She dipped her head again. The leader echoed her. Unexpected. Yet, perhaps there is merit in the unexpected. No one moved. But in that moment, the war, brutal, endless, consuming, shifted. Not much, just a sliver. But slivers can split walls, and sometimes a spark in silence is enough to light a fire. The war didn't end with a bang. There was no final battle, no definitive moment when the last shot was fired and silence reigned. Instead, it died slowly, bleeding out in skirmishes that lost their momentum, in orders that came with more hesitation, in ceasefires that grew longer between the flare-ups. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like exhaustion. Two predators, too broken to keep tearing at each other's throats. But something grew in that stillness. It started with shared strategy. Briefings conducted through translators and fractured phrases. Human maps spread out beside Thean biological projections. We argued more than we agreed. Misunderstandings flared. Old instincts rose like reflexes. But through it all, the work continued. We were planning. Together. The alliance remained fragile, its bones still setting. But the Zenor forced our hands. They were coming faster now, evolving their tactics, changing shape and strategy with terrifying speed. Against them, our hatred of each other meant nothing. They didn't care who we were. They only cared that we burned. We hit back hard. Human stubbornness and Thean adaptability proved a lethal combination. Our first true victory came at a forward Zenor outpost. The airstrike was coordinated by human tech, but it was Thean infiltration units that got in close and made it possible. The detonation echoed for miles. We lost people, good people. But we also saw something we hadn't seen in years. Momentum. It was addictive. Theans carried our wounded. Humans shared rations. I caught glimpses of something I didn't yet dare to name. Empathy, recognition, or just the grim understanding that we were each other's best shot at staying alive. For the first time, we weren't just surviving. We were pushing back. And I had become something I never intended. I wasn't just a medic anymore. I was a story, a myth, a symbol. They called me the healer. Both sides. Some said I saved a commander and sparked a truce. Others said I was a traitor who chose an enemy over my own. But what mattered was that they talked. My name passed through the ranks like a spark between wires, dangerous, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. Kara, Thean commander, once my patient, became something more than an ally. We worked side by side in field hospitals turned shared outposts. Her voice, clipped and precise, spoke volumes even when her translator stuttered. We developed a rhythm, treating, adapting, arguing. She learned to curse in English. I learned that Tianes didn't laugh, not exactly, but they had something close. A vibrating hum that trembled through their armor when amused. It was strange, and strangely comforting. We weren't friends, not yet, but we were something. Survivors, maybe. Mirrors. One night, after another day, stitching soldiers from both sides, I found her standing over a fresh grave, a human soldier's. Her mandibles clicked quietly. "This war," she said, voice low, translator catching the words one beat too late, consumes even the victors. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The tide turned again at Red Verge, a massive Zenor hive pulsing with organic weapons and thousands of drones. We hit it together, human artillery and Thean shock units in seamless coordination. The fight was brutal, a full day of blood and smoke and screaming. But when it was over, the hive burned, and the Zenor fell back. That night, under the stars, no one cheered. We just sat, side by side, staring at the sky like we didn't know what to do with the quiet. Word spread, not just of the victory, but of the alliance. Other units tried it, some failed, but others made it work. Because they had to. Because the Zenor didn't give second chances. We began to believe that we could win, not alone, but together. There were moments of grace in the ruins. A Thean and a human soldier, both wounded, holding on to the same IV bag. An engineer teaching a Thean technician how to calibrate a human shield generator, communicating through crude sketches and nods. I watched those moments with a kind of quiet awe. They weren't miracles. They were choices. What grew between us wasn't easy or clean. There was still fear, suspicion, grief. But there was also purpose and something deeper. Trust, if you squinted hard enough. Near the end, I stood on the edge of a crater, looking down at the shattered remains of a Zenor war beast. Its shell cracked, its insides steaming. Kara stood beside me, her body still healing from a recent blast. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We'd lived through enough words. When we finally drove the Zenor past the rim, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like survival. A line drawn in blood, not a finish line. But it was something, a chance. The war isn't over. It may never truly be. The Zenor are still out there, somewhere in the void, but we are no longer what we were. Humans, Theans, enemies. Now we are what we became in the ashes, co-conspirators in survival, architects of a new kind of future, and maybe, just maybe, builders of peace. That possibility is still fragile, but so was the first stitch I sewed into alien flesh, hands trembling. And that held, so will this.